Sometimes, to truly encounter your own self, you need to learn the art of stepping away, not from people, but from illusions. We often mistake emotional distance for indifference, believing that if someone becomes less accessible, withdraws, or retreats into themselves, it signifies a cooling of feelings. But Jung saw not coldness in this, but the commencement of healing. Emotional distancing isn't about disappearing. It's about ceasing to dissolve completely into another. It's an internal process, subtle and almost imperceptible to outsiders, yet fundamentally radical. You reclaim your projections, your power, your very identity. This act isn't escape, but maturity. You stop demanding that someone else be the meaning of your existence. You allow them to simply exist alongside you and yourself. Be with yourself unconditionally, without the expectation that they'll finally understand, feel, or appreciate. You cease imploring another's soul to rescue your own. In Jungian psychology, attachment frequently manifests as an unconscious form of projection. We invest more than just feelings into another. We pour in shadows, complexes, parental figures, fears of abandonment, a thirst for recognition. All that remains unlived within us, we subconsciously transfer to those closest to us. The nearer someone is, the stronger the projection becomes. We don't merely love. We hope that through this person, something inside us will heal, fill, cease to ache. But that's not love. It's expectation. Not presence, but need. And this is where the breakdown begins. Sooner or later, the real person will inevitably diverge from our projection, giving rise to pain. You're not who I thought you were. Yet the pain isn't because of them. It stems from the shattering of an illusion. Emotional distance initiates precisely when you realize that what you felt was directed less at them and more at an internal image you fashioned yourself. When you distance yourself, you're not severing the bond. You're purifying it. You're recovering the capacity to see the person as they genuinely are, not as you desire them to be. This can be excruciating. Illusions often possess a captivating allure, hope a warming glow, fantasy a vibrant hue. However, maturity commences with the loss of self-deception, with relinquishing the notion that someone external can be the source of your inner tranquility. You remain, yet no longer cling. You're near, yet unbound. You possess the ability to walk away without shattering. You can remain silent without experiencing guilt. This isn't about resentment or manipulation. It's a silence within which authenticity is born. Jung would say that in this moment, you cease to be a fragment of someone else's shadow and reclaim your own I for the first time. Emotional distance isn't an absence of space, but a space where you begin to perceive yourself, where for the first time you're not rescuing, proving, or striving. You simply are. Existing in this state is not easy. Initially, feelings of loss emerge, as though you've lost connection. Yet you'll soon recognize that you've lost nothing, but rather ceased holding on. And that is a colossal difference. A connection not maintained out of fear, but chosen out of freedom, is the only authentic connection. Everything else is playing a role. You release control, and within that lies immense power, because you no longer need to be correct, needed, or agreeable. You allow yourself to be alive, and extend that same allowance to another. This is maturity. This also is love. Not the kind that seizes and demands, but the kind that provides space and peace. A love liberated from projections, a love within which you don't lose yourself. Sometimes a connection appears warm, almost familial. It possesses familiarity, shared memories, an internal track you've long been traveling. You can laugh together, discuss life, even support one another. But internally, like a hairline fracture in a cup, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present, you'll see energy slowly ebbing away. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like water, drop by drop, seeping into the fissure. Such connections are difficult to recognize as destructive, as they don't always inflict pain. Yet they rob you of life, of a truly genuine, complete, and aware existence. Jung termed these relationships unconscious symbioses. You appear close, but fundamentally you're losing yourself. They feed on your time, attention, emotional warmth, and offer in return only the illusion of connection. A destructive connection isn't necessarily toxicity in the traditional sense. It's not always about quarrels, criticism, or manipulation. It often masquerades as care, as attachment, as we've been through so much together. But therein lies its power. It's ingrained in your history, and to relinquish it feels akin to relinquishing a piece of yourself. It's almost an archetypal drama, a rupture with a past that has grown too constricting. You sense that alongside this person, you cease to grow, becoming cautious, less alive, beginning to adapt, compromise, and maintain equilibrium merely to avoid disruption. However, authentic connection demands no such performance. It doesn't compel you to sacrifice yourself for the sake of peace. It provides space to be. If you're constantly forced to choose between yourself and the relationship, you've already lost yourself. Relationships that erode often hinge on old wounds, precisely those you've already forgotten. This person might activate a sense of guilt within you, mirroring what you felt in childhood alongside a parent, or a fear of being rejected, ridiculed, abandoned. Then, you begin to adapt, smooth things over, remain silent. You might even feel obligated to stay, even when you desire to leave. This is no longer a choice, but an internal program. Jung wrote that within each of us resides not only a conscious part, but an unconscious one that guides us along a pre-scripted narrative. If you fail to recognize this script, it will repeat itself, and each such connection becomes like a mirror, revealing where you still ache, where you're not yet free. It's not easy to acknowledge, but awareness is the first step toward liberation. There are relationships we fail to leave because we dread loneliness, or believe it's our destiny, or because we've invested too much. We deceive ourselves, claiming it's not all that bad. We disregard internal signals, the anxiety, fatigue, tension. We attribute it to stress, external circumstances, anything but the true nature of the connection. But the soul doesn't deceive. It knows where you're genuinely cherished, and where your presence is merely exploited as a convenient mirror. It knows where you come alive, and where you fade. A relationship that erodes always violates your integrity. You become fragmented, losing sight of who you are and what you desire. You forget your dreams, desires, internal path. You live as though through another, hoping they'll give you form. But they're not the source of the destruction. You're surrendering your essence, and therein lies the profound pain and the profound opportunity to reclaim it. To begin piecing yourself back together, grain by grain, rebuilding not the relationship, but your own soul. You may be certain you love, deeply, wholeheartedly. Only years later, you may realize that it was not the person you loved, but the image, created by you, nourished by your expectations, fears, and hopes. It was a feeling, but not directed at them. It was an experience born within you, but projected outward, like the light of a projector reflected on a blank wall. Jung termed this projection, where the unconscious seizes parts of your soul and affixes them to another. You see not who stands before you, but who your internal drama desires to see. It could be a savior, an ideal partner, or someone who finally understands. But it's always an illusion. Projection is the bridge by which shadows travel towards light. It's your internal film, in which another plays the starring role, often without even knowing. Such connections feel particularly intense. They draw you in. They carry drama, peaks, falls, and a fierce pain. And this feels real because it evokes a strong emotional reaction. But from a Jungian perspective, the strength of emotion is not always a sign of authenticity. On the contrary, the more you project, the stronger the click becomes, because you are interacting not with another person, but with your own unconscious part. And if you are lacking something, for example, love, acceptance, recognition, you will unconsciously seek the one who will fill this lack. It doesn't matter whether he is capable of doing this. The main thing is that he corresponds to the internal archetype. And then, everything that you did not receive once, you will expect from him. This is dependence, not love, not closeness, but an attempt to heal an internal wound through another. One of the most painful moments is the moment of exposure. When the projection begins to collapse, you see a person without filters, and suddenly it turns out that he is not at all what he seemed, that he is not sensitive, not mature, not capable of loving as you need, or vice versa, that he is too real, with his weaknesses, fears, boundaries, and you feel like you have been deceived. But it's not he who deceived you. It's you who didn't see, didn't want to see, because he saw in him exactly what you lacked in yourself. And then comes the moment of truth, painful, but healing. You can no longer deny that everything you felt was not quite about him, but about you. And this does not make the experience false. This makes it yours, personal, meaningful, important, but not a justification for eternal attachment. At this moment a chance appears. Do not hold the person back and reverse the projection. Take yours and return to yourself. This is the essence of maturity. To see when a feeling is your internal response and not a reflection of real contact. Recognize that you may feel attached, not because the person is yours, but because he activated your internal scenario. This is difficult. It's painful. It requires honesty and internal discipline. But it is here that freedom is born. When you stop being a victim of feelings, when you realize that to love is not to depend, that you can be touched, but not absorbed, that you can feel, but not lose yourself. This has enormous power, because every moment when you return the projection, you become more holistic. You look at another, not with the eyes of a deficit, but with the eyes of clarity. You do not require, you see. And in this look there is no need for illusion, only a person, and only you, finally without play. You cannot free yourself from what you do not see. Attachment lives in a blind spot, in the automatism of feelings, reactions, in repeating thoughts that you take for truth. You suffer, miss, get angry, wait, and believe that all this speaks to the strength of your feelings. But Jung argued, if you are drowning in emotion, you are not in contact with yourself. You are under the hypnosis of the unconscious. Emotional attachment does not thrive on logic. It thrives on fog. Mindfulness is like turning on the light in a room where you are used to walking around by touch, and suddenly you see that behind the pain there is fear. Behind the longing, not love, but dependence. Behind the expectation is the old childhood hope that someone will come and save you. Mindfulness does not get rid of feelings. It returns you to power over them. It's like waking up from a dream within a dream. And for the first time you understand that everything you experienced happened not so much in reality as within your perception. When you become an observer, you separate not from the person, like from an automatic reaction. This is a subtle inner turn, almost imperceptible, but it changes everything. You are no longer in love. You notice that your love was activated in response to certain signals: voice, smell, manner of communication, care. You're not no longer can't be without him. Now you know that you feel pain when you are left alone, and this pain is not about him, but about your inner emptiness. You no longer suffer because he doesn't appreciate it. You notice how the old desire to be recognized, heard, and needed lives in you. This does not make the feeling false. On the contrary, it returns to them authentic depth. But now they don't rule over you. They become part of your experience, but not your prison. Mindfulness is not analysis. This is the silence in which you first hear what exactly is driving you. And it is in this silence that freedom is born. Jungian practice suggests not suppressing emotions, but entering into a dialogue with them. You can sit in silence, close your eyes and imagine that your longing is sitting in front of you, or your jealousy, or your attraction to the person you want to free yourself from, and ask a question: who are you? The answer may not come immediately, but it will come through an image, sensation, memory. This is the work of active imagination. It allows you not to run away from feelings, but to see what message it carries. It often turns out that in these feelings your inner child speaks, or a shadow, that part of you that you have suppressed, or anima, the archetype of the feminine in the unconscious of a man who seeks embodiment in an external woman. And the more you see, the weaker the chain becomes, because emotional attachment is not the strength of the connection, but the strength of the unconscious. And as soon as you start looking, the knot begins to unravel. Mindfulness is an act of love for oneself, not narcissistic, but deep, mature, almost monastic love. This is a choice to be with yourself even when there is a storm inside. It is a habit not to run away, neither to another, nor to suffering, nor to hope. This is an internal position. I am ready to meet myself, even if I am afraid, in pain, alone. And the more often you choose this path, the quieter the dependence becomes. It's like a ghost. It's scary until you run, but it's worth turning around and it disappears, because at its core is an illusion, and at the core of awareness is truth. Not great, not sublime, not inspiring, but simple, earthly, human truth about yourself. And this truth is the only thing that truly frees. No struggle, no escape, no manipulation, but the warm, clear light of your attention. In it, everything that destroys you loses its power, because you are no longer inside. You are nearby. You are a witness. You are free. There are moments when words can no longer change anything, when all the conversations have been said, the feeling has been taken from the depths, hope has burned to the ground. But inside there remains incompleteness, as if a part of you is still holding the door open, not because she believes, but because she is afraid to let go completely. This feeling hangs in the air, does not allow you to breathe, does not allow you to move on. Jung believed that completion is not an event, but a process, and this process has its own alchemy, symbolic, deep, almost ritualistic, because our psyche does not react to words, but it reacts to images, actions, gestures that make sense to the unconscious. That is why it is so important not just to decide for yourself, but to go through the internal path of farewell. Sometimes this path is silent, sometimes filled with tears, but always sacred. You are not just parting with a person. You are closing a chapter in which a part of your soul was invested. Rituals are the language of the unconscious. We are used to thinking that rituals are something from religion or culture, but in the Jungian sense, a ritual is any action filled with meaning. It does not necessarily have to be logical or correct. The main thing is that it resonates in your inner world. Someone writes a letter, burns it. Someone returns things even if it's just an old cup. Someone turns on the music under which there was the first dance and allows himself to cry. This is not weakness or sentimentality. This is a way to complete the gestalt, return the energy that is still stuck in the past. A symbolic act helps the unconscious understanding. This is the end. Not death, not tragedy, not defeat, but a transition. As in ancient rites of initiation, you leave the old to enter the new. But in order to switch, you need to leave, not at the level of thought, but at the level of the soul. Farewell is always associated with loss, not only of another person, but also of who you were next to him. Sometimes this is the most painful thing. You say goodbye not only to the relationship, but also to the role you have entered, to be needed, to be strong, to be a savior, or to be saved. You say goodbye to the dream, to the future that did not come true, to the image of yourself that lived through this connection, and in this farewell emptiness is born. She scares. But Jung wrote, emptiness is a space for the soul. It's like a cup. It must be emptied so that it can be filled again. We are afraid of emptiness, because in it our usual supports disappear. But it is in this emptiness that the authentic I begins to manifest, the one that no longer clings, that does not depend, that does not need another to feel its value. Farewell is a rite of return to oneself, through pain, through silence, through emptiness, but to oneself. If you want to free yourself from emotional attachment, you need to go through the path of symbolic completion as an internal ritual. It is not necessary to do something external. It is more important that inside there is an act of conscious farewell. It can be a dialogue with a person who is not there, or a letter that you will never send. It can be a day of silence, in which you allow yourself to remember everything and let go, or even just a solitary walk, during which you will say to yourself, now I choose, and walk further. This is not magic, but it works, because the unconscious hears symbols, and when you commit this act with respect, with attention, with sincerity, something inside shifts. The pain does not go away immediately, but it ceases to be the master. You become again the one who goes, who chooses, who lives. Symbolic completion is not just a way to let go of another. This is a way to regain the right to your own forward movement. Sometimes you wake up and feel that you are tired, although you slept. During the day, thoughts still revolve around a person who is not there, or maybe he is physically there, but has long been absent in soul. It seems that there is devastation inside you, and this is not just grust. It feels like you have become someone less whole than you were before the meeting. Energy, attention, vitality, they seem to have flowed into another. Jung said that in any meaningful relationship, we do not just interact, we project. And often, along with projections, We give away our energy. We invest in another hope, meanings, symbols. We make him the carrier of our internal energy. And when the connection breaks or weakens, it seems to us that something has been stolen from us. But in fact, it is we who gave it away, voluntarily, unconsciously, point eu, and only by becoming conscious, we can start this path back to ourselves. The process of returning energy is not mysticism, but deep inner work. The Jungian practice of active imagination suggests sitting in silence, closing your eyes, and imagining that you are entering into a dialogue with this person, but not as with a personality, but as with an image in your inner world. Imagine that you are sitting opposite each other, and say, "I came to take what is mine." This is not an act of aggression, not a requirement. This is an internal act of fairness. You return the invested feelings, dreams, energy, images to yourself. All that was yours before you transferred it to him. Sometimes you can see energy in the form of light, color, heat, or a symbol returning to you. This may be strange, unusual, but your psyche understands this language. Because, as Jung said, the unconscious does not speak in words, it speaks in images. And if you commit this internal act, consciously with respect, energy begins to return. Returning energy is not only about strength. This is about returning fragments of yourself. Often in relationships we give more than we should. We sacrifice time, interests, boundaries, dreams, and this seems normal, until you begin to feel internal emptiness. Then the question arises, who am I without this person, without this connection, without this pain, and in this question, the beginning of the path home. Returning energy, you collect yourself like a broken cup from shards. Sometimes you suddenly remember what you dreamed of doing when no one distracted you. Suddenly the inspiration that has long left you returns. There is lightness in the body, clarity in the eyes. This is not magic. This is the result of you taking yourself back. What you gave in the hope that it would give you love, recognition, or security. Now you understand. No one can be the carrier of your soul, and you return it to yourself. This path requires time, sometimes courage, because by returning energy, you are not just restoring strength. You acknowledge that a part of you has long lived in not you, that you expected from another what only you yourself can give yourself. This is painful, but liberating. You no longer wait. You do not cling. You do not play with hope. You return to yourself responsibility for your integrity. It is then that the feeling of internal maturity appears, the same one that Jung wrote about, the maturity at which you do not need another to be alive. You can love, but not dissolve. Be near, but do not lose the center. And when your energy returns to you, you begin to live differently, not out of needs, not out of pain, not out of fear of being abandoned, but out of fullness, because you're home again, in yourself, in your field, in your power. And this is no longer an attachment. This is freedom. Sometimes the best thing you can do is leave, not because you are tired of fighting, not because you want to prove something to another, but because in this departure is an act of love for yourself. In the noise of relationships, correspondence, attempts to understand, persuasion, scandals, and expectations, we lose not only energy, but also ourselves. We begin to speak not in the voice that lives in us, but in the one that is born out of pain. And the more we are involved, the less space remains for internal silence. And after all, it is silence that allows us to hear ourselves again. Carl Jung wrote that the unconscious addresses us in all Voloch, in dreams, in intuition, but it does not shout, it whispers. And to hear it, you need to be silent. To leave external contact means to create a space where the soul can again speak to you, without pressure, without other people's expectations, without the pain that you are constantly trying to drown out with interaction. Silence is not always easy, especially if you are used to saving, explaining, hoping. We hold on to contact because it gives the illusion of control. As long as we communicate, something can still be fixed. But it is in this habit that the trap lies, because behind it is not love, but fear. Fear of letting go. The fear of being alone with what will remain when the external irritant disappears. But this fear is like a door. Behind it is not emptiness, but freedom. Silence is not the end of communication, but the beginning of connection with oneself. It is not needed in order to punish another silence, but to stop being dependent on his reactions, words, moods. When you interrupt contact, you, as it were, come out of hypnosis. You look at the situation not from the inside, but from the outside, and only then you begin to understand how much in this connection was not about love, but about pain, not about closeness, but about repeating an old scenario. To leave is not to tamsteat. This is not coldness. This is insight. It's like leaving a room where they don't hear, not because you're offended, but because you don't want to shout anymore. Rozrywka is a boundary. This is the line that you draw to say, this is where I end. And it starts with what no longer belongs to me. Sometimes this is perceived by others as egoism, but this is not egoism. This is returning oneself to oneself. In Jungian psychology, there is the concept of individuation, the process in which a person becomes himself, connects with his essence. And it is impossible to go this way by remaining in a connection that is constantly pulling you back into the past, into an old role. Breaking contact becomes initiation. You, like a hero, leave home to meet the unknown. You go into the unknown, not to disappear, but to be born again. And in this process, you do not lose. You are freed. In silence, you begin to see where love ends and attachment begins, where sincerity ends and habit begins, where the real you ends. And it starts with someone who is trying to be convenient, to be needed, to be saved. When you leave, you return your name, your depth, your internal truth. You stop asking, what will he think? How will he react? And you start asking yourself another question. What do I feel when I am left alone? This is the way home. Jung wrote that only in solitude can a person enter into genuine contact with the self, his deep center. And the self does not require approval, does not cling, does not need constant confirmation from outside. She is silent. She is strong. And when you come into contact with her, you no longer need someone who does not hear you, because you yourself have finally heard yourself. There is a feeling that is easy to confuse with love, but it corrodes from within. It makes you check your phone, wait for an answer, be afraid to lose, live with other people's reactions. It is not fed by trust, but by anxiety. Does not give freedom, requires confirmation. It says I can't live without you, but it actually whispers, I'm afraid to be left with myself. This is dependence. It can be beautiful on the outside, filled with passion, romance, affection. But inside it is an emptiness that another person must constantly fill. True connection is quiet. It does not require, does not capture, does not torment. It is like a transparent thread between souls that does not pull, but unites. Carl Jung wrote that love is a meeting of two whole personalities, and addiction is an attempt to find in another what you do not recognize in yourself. And the stronger the fear, the stronger love seems. But this is not fortress, this is a covey. Dependence often hides under the mask of deep feeling. She says, I just can't stop thinking about him. But if you look closely, this is not about love, but about trying to get attention, be needed, be saved. You do not love so much as you want to be loved. To glue together what cracked once in childhood, a lack of warmth, acceptance, security. And you hope that if you are near, you will try to endure, give, then maybe you will be chosen. But true connection does not require effort to hold it. It is held not by fear, but by deep respect for the space of another. Where there is love, there is always air. In dependence, only tension. How to understand that you are in a trap. See if you disappear as a person. If next to a person you start to doubt yourself, lose support. Stop hearing the inner voice. It's not love. This is a painful fusion. Archetypally, addiction is an attempt to merge with another to feel alive. This is a regression to an infant state, when the whole self is determined through the mother. In Jungian theory, this can be associated with the archetype of the great mother, all-consuming, giving a sense of security, but also capable of pulling into infantilism. In such relationships, you cease to be a subject and turn into a projection, a function. You live not like you, but as a reaction to another, and all your energy goes into trying to maintain contact, even if it destroys you. In a true connection, you remain yourself. You may disagree, you may leave, you may be different. You are not repelled. There is no fear that you will stop being loved if you are not pleasing, because love is not a contract, it is not a deal. This is a space where you are seen whole and remain. And addiction is an eternal deal. I will be the way you need me to be, just don't leave. You can distinguish one from the other only through contact with yourself. When you honestly ask yourself the question, am I calm or anxious with this person? Do I feel freedom or fear? Do I open up or get lost? True connection always leads to you. It strengthens, expands, makes you more alive, not because the other gave, but because in this presence you allow yourself to be real. And addiction always leads away from itself. You begin to live on someone else's breath. You make choices, focusing not on your center, but on the possible reaction of another. And then life becomes walking on the edge. Mindfulness brings you back to yourself. You begin to distinguish. This feeling was born out of love or out of fear of being abandoned, from internal fullness or from an internal hole. Freedom begins only in this honesty, not a person, but an illusion. And then you can not only distinguish one from the other, but also find out for the first time what a truly mature and lively connection is. There is a myth in which almost everyone believes, a myth that loneliness means a lack of isolation, tragedy. We are afraid to be left alone, as if there is something wrong with it, as if the very essence of human being requires the constant presence of another. But there is a loneliness of a different kind, not as the absence of someone, but as a return to oneself. In the silence that remains after the break, you first hear only pain, loud, ringing, obsessive. It seems as if this emptiness eats from within, but time passes, and you begin to notice that there is air in this emptiness. There are no other people's voices in it. No one pulls you to the side in it, does not require attention, does not fill your inner space with itself, and suddenly you hear the rustle of your own thoughts, as if, for the first time in a long time, you are in a room with yourself. Jung wrote that a person becomes himself only in contact with the unconscious. It is in solitude that this contact becomes possible. We are used to filling loneliness, communication, work, noise, series, new relationships. Because silence scares, it's like a mirror. It is impossible to hide from yourself, but it is in this mirror that you begin to see who you really are, without roles, without reflection in someone else's eyes, without habits. What remains when no one is around? What are your desires if they no longer need to be coordinated? What is your truth if you do not adapt it to another? Loneliness becomes a space for rebirth. It is like a cave in archetypal tales, a place where heroes go to die and be born again. It's dark, scary, cold there, but it is in this darkness that an internal light is born, one that does not depend on the external, one that does not go out if you are rejected, because it's not about them, it's about you, about yourself, which you forgot when you tried to be needed, loved, irreplaceable. Loneliness is not a punishment, but an initiation, a test that a person goes through to reach a new degree of maturity. It's like an internal winter, when everything freezes, so that later it can live with new strength. We are afraid of this winter, because there are no former landmarks in it, but only in it can you stop living by inertia. Jung said that the soul strives for wholeness, and loneliness is her way to distract us from the noise, from the bustle, from other people's expectations, so that we can finally hear the call from within. This call is not always pleasant. Sometimes it leads to tears, to long-buried memories that have long been suppressed. But if you don't run away, if you stay, healing begins. Not fast, not linear, but real. In loneliness we meet our shadow, those parts of ourselves that we were ashamed of, rejected, hid, and only by accepting them can we become whole. Because wholeness is not perfection, it is honesty with oneself. When you stop fearing loneliness, you become free. You no longer choose relationships out of fear. You do not cling to those who destroy you. You do not cling to illusions only because someone is nearby. You begin to see that being alone does not mean being lonely. Another quality of silence is born within you. There is no pain in it. There is peace in it. It's like coming home after a long journey. It is not noisy there, but cozy. There is no crowd there, but there is you. And this feeling of one's own sufficiency is not pride, but maturity. This is not a rejection of intimacy, but a readiness. Build it differently, not out of lack, but out of fullness. Loneliness teaches you to be yourself. It does not make you aloof. It makes you real. And when you learn to be in this space, not suffering, but listening, you will understand. You have not lost anything. You have acquired something that cannot be obtained from the outside. You have become closer to yourself, and this is the most valuable union that can be built. When you let go, at first it seems that you are losing a person, a connection, a future that was built in the imagination. Every memory becomes heavy, like a stone, because you can no longer return to him. The world inside seems to freeze. There is a feeling that you are thrown out of your own space, in which there used to be us, and now only I, and it is scary to start with. You are used to holding on to words, gestures, promises, projections, but when you really let go, really without looking back, without conditions, without sudden things, another thing begins to penetrate this emptiness, not immediately, not sharply, but like a light that slowly disperses the internal fog, and you notice that it is easier to breathe every day, not because you have forgotten, but because you have returned to yourself. Jung said that the path to integrity lies through the death of old identities, and letting go is exactly such a death, but it is always followed by birth. You begin to understand that what you held on to had long since not belonged to you. You held on not to a person, but to the feeling that he aroused, for the image, for the idea, for that version of yourself that you felt next to him, and letting go, you refuse not him, but the illusion, from trying to hold water in your hands. And then a space opens up for another experience, deep, internal, undivided. You no longer seek salvation in someone else's presence. You start listening to yourself. There is no victory in this process. There is no proof of strength. There is a return, step by step. You restore your internal axis. You no longer live on the external circuit. You go inside, and there inside you find, not emptiness as you feared, but a quiet light. It does not blind. It just is, constant, uniform, like breathing. You discover that you can be yourself without someone else's confirmation, evaluation, without a mirror in the form of another. You discover that you are alive, not alive while someone is nearby, but just alive. Archetypally, this moment is similar to the return of the prodigal son. Only the house to which you return is yourself. You have long wandered in search of love, recognition, merging, but all this time the truth was closer than it seemed. Jung spoke of the self as the internal center of personality, which remains unchanged despite all external transformations. And at the moment of letting go, you begin to approach her. It's like cleaning a mirror from the plaque of the past. At first it is cloudy, resentments, ojalinia, fears, but over time you begin to see your face, not the one you would like to be, but the one that is, real, without play, without masks, and for the first time you feel respect for yourself, because the one who let go is not weak, it is mature. It is the one who dared to admit that holding on to the destroyed is scarier than stepping into the unknown. And this decision becomes the first step towards freedom, not to loneliness, but to true internal fullness. You let go and return, to yourself, to the body, to the feelings, to the dreams that you have not dreamed of for a long time, to the desires that were silenced by other people's needs. You no longer look for yourself in others. You create yourself. And this is not a moment of process, sometimes painful, sometimes inspiring. You become a witness to your formation. You see how the old falls off, like dry bark, and under it a new living tissue is born. You become different, not the one who was before the connection, and not the one who dissolved in it. You are new, and perhaps this is the most important thing that can be acquired in the moment of loss. Yourself, whole, mature, free. Because, oddly enough, we truly find ourselves not when someone loves us, but when we were able to stay with ourselves after someone left, when in loneliness we discovered neither darkness but light. Then, when in silence we heard the voice, no one's own, and understood, here it is. Sometimes, in order to return to yourself, you must first lose connections, images, habits that seem to be part of us. It's painful, but in this pain there is a secret moment of truth, the moment when you are left alone and do not fall, when silence does not hurt, but heals, when the distance between you and another ceases to be a rupture and becomes a bridge, not to him, but to you. We often seek love outside, hoping that someone will fill our internal emptiness.